This tank has gone a little bit nuts. So I set this up 3 months ago total. The first month it was sort of just growing in, but very quickly it turned into this. I trimmed it back. It turned into it again. I trimmed it back, and yeah, here we are. Now it's going to do this because it's pearlweed. Pearlweed is such a fast-growing plant. Plus, combined with the substrate system that we set up in this tank, I'll take you back and just talk you through it. So I started off with some bags of gravel and substrates, just some old stuff that I'd already used, and then placed it into the aquarium on the base. Now capped over the top of this with even more gravel and sand that I'd used in other scapes. And it's just really to build up height, to be honest, more than anything. And then after that, the hardscape went in massive rocks, which was an absolute mission, but come up with a quite simple design. Iragumis usually keep quite simple. And then in went the aquasoil, that's the layer that sits on top of all of that sort of bulking up material underneath. The stuff underneath is brilliant for beneficial bacteria to colonize, so it was a really good addition. I then realised they didn't put any nutri-base down, so I started sprinkling that everywhere before putting the final layer of aquasoil all over the top. Then it was time for the planting. I went for pearlweed, obviously, as you guys know. I already had some sprigs of it in other tanks that I clumped together and planted in. And then in a few weeks, the tank hit a diatom phase, so in went Amano shrimp and Otocinclus. They did a great job of sorting the whole thing out. And then about a month later, it was already looking perfect. And at this point is when I took out the CO2, and it just went from strength to strength then. Now for the first month whilst it was growing in, I did have CO2 running on it, just because I wanted to get it going a lot faster. Wasn't needed, and it hasn't had any now for several months, and it still just grows absolutely nuts. I think pearlweed is one of the best beginner plants because not only does it give you this massively vibrant green, it's just so easy to grow, I think, anyway. Sometimes I've set up tanks with certain things in it that raise the pH level, which meant that some stems didn't grow very well, but the pearlweed still did. It's unstoppable. Now there's a few options that we can take to trim it all up. One of them being just normal scissors, get right down in there and start trimming. The other option is specialist scissors, like curved ones, and I've actually got some, hang on. Yeah, I've got these scissors here. So I got them from Aquarium Gardens. Dave said, oh, these would be so good for your pearlweed tank. And I was like, actually, yeah, good point. I've got massive length of trim on them, so I should be able to get big sections fast. The other option which I've seen online people doing is they've got underwater, or waterproof is the word, waterproof beard trimmers, which I have actually got. So and then you can just go along and trim it all off. That might be an option. I'm gonna try these first because the pearlweed stems are just so fine that even a little beard trimmer should be able to cut through them. But if this works well, then there's no need for that. So I'll give these a go first and just see how it goes. So how do we go about tackling this then? Because we could start at the foreground and work our way back, but the problem is it's so tall here. This goes, there we go, I'm feeling the substrate on the bottom there. So I think best case scenario here is just to start at the top and work my way forwards and define a height I want here and sort of trace it down. In fact, this is probably the easiest section to get going on. I'm just gonna start hacking. The thing is, it makes such a mess. Oh, they cut so easy. They do cut easy. This is not awkward in the slightest as well. You can take big sections with these scissors. This isn't like a product placement. I don't even know what company makes these, to be honest. I'm just pleased to try them out. Got to be careful because the fish do like to swim in and amongst the plants. The little babies do. They sort of hide out in there just to ensure that they can survive with all the bigger ones, because some of the fish you see in here, so we've got black mollies and we've got orange swordtails. The male swordtails, they're quite sort of predatory and they will kill anything or put anything in its mouth that's small enough. I mean, that's pretty much the same with all fish, to be honest. There's also a lot of Amano shrimp that I need to be careful of. I mean, they're pretty good. They get out of the way as soon as you go near them, but still. I was a little bit worried that some of the stems would be yellow underneath because they've not received as much light, but they're literally looking so good. So I've gone down to a level there. That's still not low enough because the rocks, let me just trim a bit in the foreground to where I want. There we go. There's the rocks right down there. Yeah, so this bottom part here that you can see, maybe you can't see, but It's got a little bit of a yellow tinge to it. That's just because it was receiving basically no light. But we're going to sort that out and it will bounce back so fast. I've sort of gone off track a little bit here, haven't I? These scissors though, I am very impressed. Just follow along with it. This is going to make such a mess. It's one of the reasons I don't trim it as often as I should, is because it's not just a case of trimming it. You then, as you're going along, got to sort of clear everything out as well. These are snipping so nicely though. Yeah, so I set this tank up because I wanted to have something that was like, I wanted to be able to show that you could do a full carpeted tank very, very simply, because this plant is so fast growing and easy to propagate. It can be a little tough with things like hairgrass and glossostigma and things like that. Monte Carlo is a bit more forgiving and probably the thing I should have gone with, but this is so dense, look. It's like a full-on carpet. I mean, we do call it a carpet for a reason, but look at how well these scissors are keeping it completely flat and level. And that's because this has had several sort of trim backs. So after every trim back, all the leaves start to grow left and right and then upwards, which just means you get this perfect sort of flatness to it all. So spongy. Looks like a golf green. Now this wasn't a surprise to me because I've actually done a pearlweed sort of carpet before. It was accidental though. I set up a tank and I hadn't actually used the plant before. And literally within like a couple of months, the whole thing was covered and I was like, oh, okay, this stuff is pretty crazy. That's when I sort of latched onto pearlweed as a really good plant for any aquarium or for beginner aquariums. I just think it's brilliant. It's also known as Micranthium micromoides or something similar. I'll put that up on the screen because I probably butchered that name. And of course, when I started getting a tank that was producing so much like this, then I started like taking bits out and putting it in other tanks. And then before you know it, my whole studio at one point was basically a ton of tanks that was just pearlweed. I've sort of tried my best to steer away from that now, other than obviously this tank. I've got a little bit in some of the other tanks just to add some greenery where it's needed, because it does give you that massively vibrant green like straight away. Some areas are a little bit more awkward than others. I'm just trying to follow a line downwards, and it's quite good actually. You can rest the plant on it and then anything that pokes above, watch out Amano, anything that pokes above comes off, and then that keeps that sort of flatness that we're looking for. I'm pretty sure I'll have to go over all of this again though afterwards just to make sure it's completely flat. And that's pretty funny, look, I've been like trimming for hardly any time at all. We've already covered like the whole surface. Look at that lot. I think what's best with this one is just to work on a little area like I am and just scoop it out and then carry on, because I'm not even going to be able to see what I'm doing if I don't clean up as I go, which is going to be even more time consuming, but I think we'll get a better result come the end. Look at the back here, I can't see anything now. Let's scoop this out. So this is another reason that this job can be quite time consuming, because I need to scoop this out now, but also the fish like to hang around in it after I've trimmed it. So I need to check every time I take a scoop that there's none in there. Now fortunately, the black mollies are more shy and they don't really come close to you at all compared to the orange swordtails, which are very easy to spot. And all the swordtails that you can see in the tank are, well, all of the smaller ones anyway, are babies that have bred actually in this tank and a different tank that I had before. Just being really careful here because I don't want to pick any up. Yeah, they seem to breed really easy. Now the black mollies breed as well, but I think because the swordtails are far more sort of predatory or aggressive, they actually pick off the black molly babies like when they're really young, whereas they don't seem to pick off their own as much, and they seem a little bit more switched on and they hide right deep down in the substrate until they're big enough and fast enough to outrun either the black mollies or the adults. But yeah, to be honest, they're both live bearers, which means they give birth to live babies. They don't lay eggs or scatter eggs, which means that their birth rates are so fast. Like within like a short time of giving birth, they'll give birth again. So it's probably a good thing that the weaker ones get picked off. Otherwise, there'd probably be thousands in here by now. There we go. We can now like see a lot more clearly what's going on. And now that we've carved out that first section, should be easier to continue. I think I'm going to tidy up this side and sort of just go that way. I think that's the only real option. Now, one of the issues going this side is I have to switch to left hand, which it just feels wrong. Not like left-handed is wrong, but for me it feels wrong because it's almost like having to learn scissors again. I'm so used to doing everything right-handed, but it's one of those things where you've got to do it because if you don't, you won't learn and you won't get better at that action. A bit like kicking a football with a soccer ball, as some people say it wrongly, with your left foot if you're right-footed. So like this takes even longer than the other side because I have to like make sure I'm in the right position with every single cut. I'm just getting that line at the front here just to be sort of matching. I am exposing some of the more sort of less healthy pearlweed at the bottom there, but I think it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. Within a few days, the new shoots, not days actually, give it a week, then all the new shoots would have come through. And at that point, it's going to look great again. It's just that brand new fresh growth covering everything will look so good. And quite a few people comment about me overplanting tanks. Well, obviously, I don't think that applies to this one because a carpet is supposed to be fully planted. But I think they're talking about with like, if I've got quite a lot of wood hardscape and stuff, like I put a lot of plants on the hardscape and also a lot of stems in the background. Now, you've got to remember, the reason I do that is because I love plants, first and foremost. The second of all, it just helps massively by starting with just like real strong growth. And because I've got so many plants here in the studio already growing well, it's so easy for me to just take some trimmings, you know, like I'm sort of doing here. Not with these though, I'm not putting these in any other tank. It's so easy to take trimmings and then just place them at the back of the aquarium. Now, when you've got a ton of already healthy plants growing straight away, it just means that the tank is like, runs so perfectly straight away. Like there's like basically no startup because even on the plants, there's going to be beneficial bacteria and things. So you're sort of seeding the tank straight away. I also use a lot of beneficial bacteria when I set up a tank as well. And I think that also helps the tank. Some people don't think it's a real thing, but to be honest, for me personally, I've always never had problems with startup of tanks, with fish losses and things like that, and it's all I've ever used. Literally, when I got into the hobby, I didn't know what I was doing. Not that I completely know what I'm doing now, don't get me wrong, I still make mistakes, try and learn from them as much as possible, and I'm honest and open when they happen as well, because I'm still quite new to the hobby compared to people like, you know, Matt, who was in here, who's been doing it for like 20 years or so. So for me, I've been doing it now 4.5 years, which is like nothing in terms of like learning such a complex thing. The thing is, what you'll never hear me saying is this is the way to do it. Like I'd say this is how I do it, because I know that for every way of doing things, there's always like 20 other ways of doing it that you know, if you look at them side by side, some people have got data to back one thing up, and then you look deep enough and you'll find data that backs up another way as well. So I'll never say this is how to do it. I'll never say this is an MD setup or anything like that. It's just, you know, I like to make tanks with a nice nutrient-rich substrate. I like to cap that off so it's not floating around, you know, all the organics and nutrients, they're not floating around in the water column. And then I get some plants in there and they seem to just take off for me. So a lot of what I've had and the success I've had with my tanks has been luck, but over the years, I've started to notice patterns and stuff that like really, really does work for me. How's that looking? This side is still a little bit high, I think, in this section. It sort of slopes up. So if I just make one channel, and then I can bring everything else down to that channel. It's kind of like a step in it now. Again, I'm exposing more of the sort of yellower growth, but that's fine. It's going to bounce back. Don't need to worry about that. But I love these scissors. They just sit on it perfectly, and anything poking through, look, you can come up. Let's cut some of this bit here just to expose the rock a little bit more. This is actually the most time I've taken doing this, because obviously I'm filming and chatting with you guys as well, which is actually making it very chilled. I feel very chilled right now. I'm not someone who absolutely loves maintenance, you see. I don't mind it. It's just something you've got to get on with. But this is quite cool. I'm really enjoying this. Guys, can you come out of the way? Very sharp scissors. Like, why are you interested in the end of the scissors? No. See, it's the swordtails. They're way interested. If I go anywhere near the black molly, like they'll go away, look, straight away, go away. But the swordtails, they're coming up to me. Look. What are you doing? Okay, let's give the left hand a bit of a rest. Now I can really start to make some progress with this because I'm way quicker. Look, straight away I can just feel it. It's weird. It's going to take some time for that left trimming hand to get better. You know, this is the only carpeted tank I've got, so most of the time I can just always use my right hand. Whereas with this one, that's not the case, is it? There we go, we're really making some progress now. There's actually a little rock down here that's not really exposed at the moment. Should I trim down sort of the edges into it? I suppose that's a way of doing it. I could lift it up, I guess, put some substrate underneath it, but nah, I think that's a bit too much. That might disturb everything around it. Watch out, Amano. It's always the Amanos and the swordtails. But you see what I mean? Now that we've cleared this section, it's making the next part so much easier. Excuse me. Because I'm just literally following that line at the front and then sort of tapering it back. It's all a little bit of guesswork. Like, I'm not sure if when I trim some of these bits back here, if I'm going to start going so low that I'm on the soil. But no, I think I've got a good amount to play with. Come on, why are you in there? Now, some of you are probably looking at this with me just hacking it away thinking, oh, I'd love to have that. Don't throw it away or anything, you know. But this will be grown back for me in weeks anyway. So that's what I'm saying. Get this plant, honestly. I did learn some new things recently about pH that all sort of clicked. I was in Aquarium Gardens and their water there is at 8 pH, and mine is at neutral 7. Now, he said that if he doesn't put CO2 in his tanks, he doesn't get anything like the growth that I get from stems. Obviously, easier plants like Java ferns and Anubias, they do still grow, but yeah, it's interesting that like the difference of 1 in the pH sort of changes everything in the plant's ability to grow. I think it's because at 7, there's more available background CO2. It's in the water more because it's a lower pH. So the lower you bring the pH, the more CO2 is in the water. That's why when you inject CO2, it brings the pH down. So by Dave at Aquarium Gardens injecting CO2 in all of his tanks, he's effectively bringing them down to my level of tap water. Obviously even better as well, because nothing is better than CO2 for a tank. Like, it's the ultimate, but you know, not everyone wants to run that. I've got one tank, my 8 foot at the moment, that's running on CO2. None of the other ones are. I've done this one with a startup, and I did my red tank with a startup as well, but as soon as the growth was in, I just didn't replenish it because I was like, okay, that's fast enough, I've got enough plants. I don't need any more. Oh, we're really making progress now though, aren't we, look? Now, in saying all that though, about the pH, I have had people message me, and thank you for doing so, because you know, you get an idea set in your head, well, that must be true, but then you hear someone else's sort of experience, and they've said that they've got higher pH of, say, 8, and they still get really good growth in, you know, quite a lot of their plants. Now, I'm guessing they're a lot more selective in what they choose, but that's what it's all about. Like, just find out what plants work really well and stick with them. There's certain plants that I don't actually use because every time I use them, they just don't do well. So yeah, it's more about trial and error. Like, when I first sort of started doing the planted tanks, when I went to the shop, I just sort of bought one of everything and stuck it in the tank just to see how it would do. Because you hear all these stories when you start about plants melting's normal. Well, none of the plants I pick anymore melt. I mean, obviously crypts, sometimes you do get a bit of that, especially when the plant that's grown out of water is converting to underwater growth. But yeah, it's just a case of giving stuff a go, not being afraid to. All this stuff over this area is a lot more. Yeah, the light was not getting down here at all, but like I say, it's going to come back. Yeah, just give plants a go, just try them all out. Just obviously don't go buying a load of each one, because if it's your first sort of time trying and learning your tap water, but do get like one of each and just see what happens. For instance, I struggle a little bit with Vallisneria. I can grow it, don't get me wrong, but I have to really keep an eye on it. And other people can just stick it in their tank and it just grows as fast as this pearlweed. So yeah, just give stuff a go, don't be afraid to try it. And don't read stuff constantly and be like, well, I can't do that, because that's a bad way of looking at it. Everyone seems to get different experiences, and every tank is different in its makeup. If you've got a tank with a lot more wood in it, well, that's naturally going to bring down the pH as well. And also, if you're doing too many water changes on a tank that's got lots of wood in it, then you're going to reset your pH back to the tap water all the time. So sometimes loads and loads of water changes isn't actually good for a tank. I mean, we're all guilty of it. We can fiddle a little bit too much, especially when you've got one tank. Like when I only used to have one tank, I was always messing around with it. And it never really got a chance to settle. But then once I started getting 2 or 3 of them, I was a lot more sort of patient with the whole process, because there was other ones to be looking at that were doing well or had been settled in for a longer time. So yeah, I do recommend getting several tanks. I know that's easy to say, but you know, they don't have to be big ones. You can get a load of nano tanks on the shelf. Nano tanks can be just as enjoyable as a big tank like this as well. Obviously, you have to be a lot more selective in the fish that you get in, or even if you don't want fish, you can do it with shrimp as well if you're more interested in the whole sort of plant growing side of it. I mean, nano tanks can be even harder than larger tanks because it's a lower volume of water, so stuff can swing quite quickly. But if you can learn to get plants growing well in a nano tank, then you can definitely do well in a larger tank. Now, if you get a larger tank and CO2, it's so much easier. I have to say, adding CO2 to a tank does make everything a lot easier. You view it as a big hard thing because obviously it's like more kind of elitist and top level, but in actual fact it makes everything way easier once you've learned how to sort of set it all up and that, which can be a bit daunting, of course. That's why I like to use the kits, to be honest, rather than like the fire extinguisher method and stuff like that, which I know is going to be like a cheaper option in the long run. But I don't really want to be messing about with stuff like that, to be honest, and finding a different regulator for this and that. I mean, look, some people want to, and that's fine. It's not really something I'm into doing. Cleared a massive section there. Yeah, this is coming right down. In fact, it can come even lower, like this stuff here. Yeah, it's going to expose more of the yellow stuff, but like I say, it'll grow back. I guess what I'm sort of saying there is just never be afraid to experiment. Guys, come on, like, give me a break. I don't want to snip you. I think on the camera it looks like they're closer. They're in front of me and I'm behind. I've never actually caught a fish trimming plants. I wouldn't like to, obviously. So that's a good thing, but yeah. And we can't see what we're doing again. So if I had to give some planted aquarium top tips, like for anyone that just wants to get started and maybe attempt something like this, what would I say? Well, first of all, it depends on the style of tank you want. If you want to go for a minimalist style, then you don't really need a substrate. What you need is just a nice little pretty sand layer, quite thin, just decorative, you know. Then you need a decent hardscape if you're going for the minimalist look, which can be difficult, but you know, because you're saving money on other things, you can spend more on your hardscape. Then you can get your low-tech sort of plants, and by that I mean epiphyte, stuff that attaches to that wood or rock. And then you need appropriate lighting. Now, I mean, if you've not got a substrate system in place, there's literally, and you've not got like loads of plants like this growing, there's no need to have big, powerful lighting. I used to go wrong with this myself. I used to get like expensive, high, well, not necessarily expensive because I used a lot of floodlights, but they're too powerful. You do not need powerful lighting when you're doing a minimalist style tank. So for that style of tank, yeah, you just need good hardscape, lower lighting, probably a bit more water changes as well than usual, just simply because you haven't got that substrate system just eating waste all the time. Now, if you want to go for something like this, then the first thing, the most important thing to start with is the substrate system, making sure that it's packed with nutrients. Because what that means is that as soon as you get the plants in there, within days to a week, they're already settled and growing. Then you need, again, appropriate lighting for the style you've gone for. If you've got a lot of plants that are like using up loads of nutrients, then you can have higher lighting. Now, don't get me wrong, you still can't have as high lighting as with CO2, but if you're not interested in that, then that's just something that you're going to have to play around with. If you're getting too much algae on everything, then you've definitely got too much lighting. If you've got a nice, good, nutrient-rich substrate. If the plants are growing well and you're still getting algae, then it's definitely a lighting issue. It just always has to be. Don't overstock it either. If you've got an overstocked tank and the plants can't use all the waste, then again, there's going to be free-floating organics everywhere, and that means that the algae is going to have a source to feed from. Some people don't worry too much about algae, but I know what it's like. When you start a tank, you just hate it. It looked perfect for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, now it's just covered in different types of algae. You don't know what to do. It's the sort of thing that puts people off, and then they just give up. But do be aware that after a couple of weeks of a new setup, there's always algae. Like literally, I'll probably count on one hand the amount of times I haven't had algae in a new setup. Even my 8-foot at the moment, which has got, you know, that's got CO2 running on it, loads of plants, but even that has got like algae now, and I'm fine with it. I'm just sort of letting it do its thing. I'm not panicking too much. I'm not doing tons of water changes. I'm just letting it go through that phase, and then I can adjust accordingly afterwards, because that new tank syndrome, what people call it, is just where there's just a massive imbalance and everything's trying to get balanced. So I tend to just leave the whole thing until it's got balanced, and then I can adjust. If you do it too early, you don't really know what you're adjusting. You're just guessing, really. Sometimes it can work, as with any sort of gambling, but I find it best to leave it. Right, this gets a bit trickier now because I've got the inlet and outlet around there, so I can't really see what I'm doing. I'm just going to get in there. For this upper side here, I'm just going to follow the lines of the rock. So it's just peeking over the top, but not too high. I've already banked the substrate system up higher here as well, so, you know, like the plants that I'm cutting are actually still following the substrate lines. That was deliberate, because otherwise you're sort of kind of guessing. I can also feel where it's denser as well from the previous trim. Obviously, every time you trim, all of the stems then start trying to grow horizontally for a short amount of time, and then they go up again, which is what I'm trimming off now, the upward part. Okay, we're looking good, we're getting there now. It's this section we need to tackle, which, to be honest, isn't too difficult. The hardest part was over that other side, because there's so much sort of going on over there. This one, I'm literally just following a line and banking it back. Very, very thick up here actually though, because last trim up I didn't touch this area because I quite liked how tall it was getting, but this time I'm going to bring it right down. Very, very dense here. It looks like there's not any light getting through either. Now it shouldn't be a problem this time, but the first time I did a trim I had a bit of an algae bloom afterwards. Now that makes sense, because what I'd basically done is just shocked all the plants. They've stopped growing, and as a result the waste from the fish was able to be taken advantage of by algae. We've got real high lighting on this, to be honest. Both these Lumini spot lamps, which are very, very good. Budget as well. They're not really expensive. I mean, 2 of them makes it expensive, I suppose. But yeah, this time it shouldn't have any problems like that. Maybe a little bit of algae on the glass, but that's all right. We can deal with algae on the glass very, very easily, can't we? So this is the last section that we need to trim. It's actually really difficult to get to. I'm gonna have to do it in little sections, but yeah, I really enjoyed doing this actually with you. It's been way better than just trimming it and not having anything to talk about. I mean, most of the time I put on some music and just sort of crack on. Sort of probably try and do it a little bit quicker than this usually, just a bit more rushed. So it's actually good to be able to take the time with it. I actually think the result is far better as well. And we get to have a good chat. So don't be afraid if you've got anything you want me to sort of expand upon, or people in the comments to help you with. Don't be afraid to leave a comment if you're struggling with a specific subject and that. It's also something I could potentially talk about in a future video, so if you've got any questions, leave them down below and I can make a little list of it, and it's stuff I can probably address then later on, if I know the answer, that is. I mean, if it's like specific fish things, I'm not great at that at all. I mean, I know all of your basic fish nowadays, I know all of the basic care needs, but if it's like, I don't know, like, you couldn't ask me anything about piranhas, because I don't know. Piranhas? Yeah, piranhas. Kate's here, she just said, piranhas. Maybe I should get some piranhas, yeah, babes? No. No, I don't know anything about. I didn't know anything about fish until I got them, though. Right then, all that's left to do now is clean up all this mess. Shouldn't take too long. I've been sort of doing quite a lot as I go, to be honest, but it's a lot of waving backwards and forwards, because a lot of the tiny little bits of trim, they'll be stuck in all the pearlweed at the bottom, so it's just a case of wafting it around and just making sure I'm not scooping up any fish. But luckily they all stand out quite well. It's always one of those things when you're scooping out plants from a fish tank. When you actually want to catch a fish, you can't do it. But then when you're trying to scoop out plants, they swim into the net. So final few things to do is just give the glass a little scrape. It's not too bad at all actually, it's just a couple of little bits of green spot which don't, oh, I just smashed the light, which don't come off with just a little like algae cloth. Yeah, I can just feel it with the blade. On the way up and down, you can feel some resistance, and then it's smooth, and that's when you know you're getting it off. It's probably one of the most used tools in my whole studio is this algae scraping blade, works so well. And you can go right up to the edges as well because the silicone is tucked into the glass, so there's no damage being done. And a little wipe with the algae sponge. The algae sponge is great for getting on any sort of like loose algae, but the actual grinded on stuff, you know, the green spots, kind of need the scraper for that. And then it's just a little bit of a water top up, not too much. I don't like to go right to the top. I'm just going to probably half an inch or something. And then it's just a touch of leaf zone, just to get those plants all growing nicely again. What I'm going to do in future, I'm going to do 2 in this one actually, lots of plants. What I'm going to do in future is just every week now I'm just going to take the top off rather than waiting for those big amounts of growth, because then you won't get the yellowing effect. This will all go perfect very, very quickly. Hope you guys have enjoyed this one as much as I've enjoyed doing it. A little bit different to usual, but yeah, more to come and stuff.